I loved Italy. I found the people warm and very kind. I lived with a wonderful family, and I had a marvelous maestro that I worked with over there, and I was very happy. It was my first time away from home. I had had a scholarship at the Mozarteum. I'd already done some singing, had sung with Leopold Stokowski, and I'd done some radio work and had had several nice awards. So I was feeling very good about life and very thrilled with the beginnings of my career. And I found myself in Milan, and I just loved it. And I met this teacher through Cesare Siepi. We both had the same accompanist. And he introduced me to Cesare Siepi, who recommended this teacher. And it was just at a moment in my life when I felt there were things I still needed to work on. And I wasn't completely satisfied. I was a mezzo-coloratura. I didn't feel that the warmth and the roundness of the voice had fully developed. And when I started working with this maestro Piccinini at that moment, he seemed to be helping me tremendously in this respect. So I called my poor family, which had been helping me throughout these years of study, and I said, I need just 4 more months of study with this man. Can you help me? And they said, Nedda, you're the eternal student, but we'll try. And they did. And I stayed for 4 months, and it turned out to be a very happy experience. And I started my career actually there. I started auditioning. And because I spoke the Italian language fluently, I was able to get along easily. And one thing led to another. I started, as I say, with La Scala, and then other theaters soon followed, and I did several tours with Italian companies going into Germany and into France. And I always seemed to find work. The wonderful thing about being over there is that you'd finish one job and there would be another. It wasn't this long-term planning of getting a contract 2 years hence. It was finishing today's job and suddenly getting a call to come in and do a Pergolesi next week, or going to Vienna and doing a recording, and somebody needed somebody down in Naples, and you'd fly down to Naples. There was always work, and I just stayed.
The work laws designed to preserve jobs for Italians at the expense of foreigners somehow didn't exclude you.
It didn't seem to. Actually, I had already started a career, so I wasn't truly a neophyte in the full sense of the word. I'd done some concertizing, etc., so I had a little bit of a name, and I had sung for the Rai with several foreign conductors who had brought me in with them, so I had a little bit of a wedge. I had some difficulties when I went into Holland. I performed there very successfully, but one of the Dutch mezzo-sopranos brought up charges that she felt she should have been given an opportunity. And although they gave me the job that I had been brought in to do, I found it more difficult later on to return, although I had been there 3 or 4 times at that point. England, I also had troubles. I was offered a contract with Covent Garden, and they said because I was not in the British Empire that I could not perform since my name was not that famous at that moment. And so I did run into difficulties. A couple of times there was the threat of it in Italy, but it was usually because I was doing a role there was nobody else to do. The Leoncavallo's La Boheme, for example, they couldn't find a mezzo-soprano at that moment to do it. And so it was kind of through default at times that I was allowed to do some of these things. You needed a mezzo-coloratura, they needed a dramatic mezzo in that third act. It's a very extreme role. And they had been looking for some time, and they had gotten down to the wire where they had only a month before they were going to go into their actual production. So I turned up at the right moment. I also was a very good sight reader and could be used for difficult music at the last moment, and was a quick study and a quick learner. And this was a great asset in a country where the singers didn't really like to do that kind of work. So I filled in around the edges the things that Italian singers were not that interested in doing. And therefore I sort of found I was able to make a home for myself. And slowly I was accepted as one of them.
A number of guests on this program have said that they were able to get their starts by, in Cheryl Studer's phrase, jumping in. She played viola as well as piano. She had even played in an orchestra. And she was musically proficient to the point that she could study a score on the plane, not having seen it before, get off the plane and perform it. I gather that your own background must be similar. No doubt you play an instrument.
I play the piano, and I had studied dance very seriously. I don't think I would be quite that good. I like to sing things through. I like to get them, as I say, in my throat. I wouldn't like to just study it intellectually and then start singing it in a performance. However, I can learn quickly, and that is a big help, having a musical background.
Now, Italians tend to think of most foreign mezzo-sopranos as really just short-voiced sopranos. To an Italian, a true mezzo-soprano has a voice that is pastosa, rich in pasta. Your voice, while refulgent, certainly is, if I may be so bold, less ample than, say, Fedora Barbieri's.
Right. That's a gorgeous voice, lush and beautiful. I was a great admirer of hers.
Did they say, oh, she's not a true mezzo-soprano?
No, perhaps at one point in my career, in the very, very beginning days, because I was a very young sound mezzo, which is very lyrical sound to it, some people would say, I think you're a soprano, because I had a very easy top. But I think a mezzo needs the same top as a soprano. In reality, you have to sing a do, you have to sing high C's and high B's, and in your really great roles all demand that of you. And I think what it is in the mezzo voice is the richness and the beauty and the of the voice is more middle and mid-high, and your soprano blossoms more fully and more richly on the top. The rich voice of the contralto mezzo is a very desirable quality to have too. But I think the lyric mezzo is a slightly misunderstood voice because there are many, as you say, short sopranos. I don't think there are really truly that many lyric mezzos. I'm not really a lyric mezzo because there's a little bit too much sound, I think, in the middle to be a true lyric mezzo. But I'm not the weight of a Barbieri, much that I wish I was, because it's the sound that I do love very much myself. And if I could add that little extra heft, I would have been very happy to do so. But one has to deal with the voice one has, and I use it in the way that I feel gives the most for the instrument that I was given.
How does one then distinguish what you would think of as a true trouser roll mezzo from a short-voiced soprano?
I think it's the sound, the warmth of the sound. The soprano who has the overbright sound and is a short soprano usually doesn't have the high notes of the mezzo either, because a mezzo has to have those notes. Those B's and C's are important. So if you have a short soprano who can't make a B or C, she's going to have troubles that way, and I don't think too many of them last very long.
You had begun studying with William Herman, who taught a number of celebrated singers.
Right.
Who were some of them?
Oh, Patrice Monsell, Roberta Peters, Norman Scott, Bob Brownsville, Charlie Anthony, Elaine Malbin, Eleanor Ross. He prepared people for professional careers. He really was a remarkable teacher in his time. He believed in 7 years of study, and that you had to know foreign languages. You had to be prepared in art song and lieder. You learned 15 roles, and I mean you learned the whole role. You didn't learn a few arias from them. He sent you to people to learn staging. He had a real program that he outlined.
Was that how you came to learn Italian?
Yes, it is. He sent me to a wonderful woman by the name of Otto Lenghi, who had been originally the head of the Latin languages at the University of Florence. And then in World War II, she had to flee. She was one of the very famous literary Jewish families of Florence, of Italy, and had to come to the United States and start teaching whatever students came to hand at that moment. And Mr. Herman sent all of his students to her to study. We used to take a couple of lessons a week, and as an arrangement, he said, well, I will send all of my students to you if you will give a fair, good price for my students to be able to study with you. And that she did, and it turned out to be very profitable for both of them, especially profitable for us because she was a great, truly great teacher. She taught us history and literature and everything along with the language. That's how we really learned the language, and she was a remarkable human being.
Despite your name, Casei, C-A-S-E-I, you're not actually Italian.
No, I'm not. I'm really an Irish girl at heart. The name is originally Nedda Casei. And in Italy, it was always pronounced Casei, and in the German-speaking countries, they always pronounced it Käse. And I didn't like that because it was just too close to being cheese. And so I liked that Italian pronunciation of Casei, and I sort of adopted it as I went along. And then in the smaller towns, they had no Y, since there is no Y in the Italian language, and they started putting in the I, and I found I was a mezza Italiana. So I became mezza Italiana, mezza Irlandese, and I loved it because I really adopted Italy. So I felt that it was a truism, even though that was not originally my name.
Half Italian, half Irish.
Right.
Now, voice teachers seldom are reasonable people. Instead, they seem to come in two varieties, kooks and tyrants. Some voice teachers partake of both. Was Herman in those, either or both of those categories?
Oh, yes. He was quite despotic. He was a very brilliant man, and he demanded complete allegiance, and he demanded complete obedience. And he set up a very difficult program. He expected you to follow exactly what he told you to do. He did not permit for deviations. We rarely were allowed to date. We led very austere lives, all of us, the girls. He really, truly controlled our lives. And it was very interesting because I see this happen quite often with voice teachers. He was not the only one. I've seen friends of mine and other people as I've grown older. I see some of the young students come along, and this attachment that one has for one's voice teacher, they become very godlike. There is truly a Svengali complex that most of us have towards our teachers. There's something about the study of the voice which is so personal and so all-enveloping that the person who can bring the best out of us or teach us something becomes a very important person to us. I even say once in a while when I was going through bad times, and I would say, well, it's like a psychologist. I go there to get all my frustrations out. We talk things over, and we talk about our personal lives. We express it through music. We put it into the roles I'm doing, and it is a great attachment and a very personal relationship that you have with your voice teacher. It's quite a special relationship. It can be abused if you don't have the person who handles it properly.
Was it clear from the beginning that you were cut out to sing?
Oh, I'm sure not. About everybody told me that I couldn't do it and shouldn't do it. I was an asthmatic as a child. In fact, one of the reasons my mother encouraged me with music was that she saw this was one of the things I responded to so well and would get me out of bed, was dance or music, anything that had to do. And she didn't believe what the doctors said. They felt that I would end up bedridden, and that by the time I was 12 or 13, I probably would be semi-invalid. I had very serious asthmatic problems. But the dancing, she saw, helped me. So encouraged by this, she always used the music as a way of almost like therapy for me. And I loved it. And it did. My body strengthened, and by the time I was 14, I was dancing some professional programs, actually, in New York at the Times Theater. I made my debut at 14. And I studied piano, and I really loved music. I went to a theatrical camp, a theater and the arts camp, from the time I was 10 years old. I had a scholarship, and through my piano, and I started singing there with a wonderful man who was Klaus Liebmann, who a few years ago was the head of music at MIT, a wonderful violinist who also had come over in the war years and was, in order to make a living, was working in the musical end of this drama camp. And he had the chorus, and I used to love it. He introduced me to all the wonderful operatic things which we did as a chorus. I remembered singing Voi kaj sapete as a chorus number. And I learned all about the opera through him. And although he looked down his nose at opera singers, he felt they were very unmusical people. To be a chorister, that was a supreme test of musicality and beauty of sound. And I always teased him when I went back years later and was singing in Boston. And I called and invited him to one of my performances. I said, well, you see, it didn't work. I came out an opera singer anyway, in spite of your good musical teachings. But he was one of the first people to encourage me. And also Emanuel Feuermann, the wonderful cellist, was staying at a little hotel where when we first moved to New York, he heard me playing the piano, and he told my mother, she's very musical, you certainly should encourage this child. And musically, I was always encouraged, but I think vocally, even my parents thought it would be very difficult, having had the breathing problems as a child, but that maybe it would be good for me. And I think my first lessons were given with the idea of it being more for my health than for the fact that I would make a career. But there was something inside of me. I've even found books written when I was a very small child, when they would say, what do you want to be? And other little girls would say, I want to be a mommy, or I want to be a nurse, or I want to be married. I would say I was going to be an opera singer. And I don't know where I got the idea at 6 or 7 or 8 that I was going to be an opera singer, but that was it. And people used to say, well, you have to find out if you have a voice. And I said, oh, no, I know. I'm going to be a singer.
Did your parents sing?
My mother had been a student, one of the first students at the University of the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester, and loved singing, but she had studied, and she studied as I was a small child. I used to hear her studying, and she loved music. She wasn't interested so much in opera, although she had given me an operatic name. That was more or less after a friend of hers who was interested in opera. But she always loved concerts repertoire and had hoped to have perhaps a radio career. She had a beautiful speaking voice. And my father had played the French horn in Sousa's band during World War I and had come out and gone on tour with him as a French horn player. But he was really an engineer, and he went back. He didn't like the theatrical life, so he went back into being an engineer, and that was his field of endeavor. But they both loved music and encouraged it.
I have the view that, from interviewing singers, that it, in many cases, takes several generations of frustrated performers before a family produces one who makes a career, who's able to make a career.
I think that's probably very true, because I've understood that my grandmother, my father's mother, had a beautiful contralto voice, and that and she played the piano and the organ, and whenever a musician came to town, she was always requested to be the accompanist, so she must have been quite a musician. And I think she had no training whatsoever. It was just a great love within her, and I heard from my mother that she had a beautiful voice. I unfortunately did not know her. She died before I was born, so it was one of those things where we missed each other. My mother always said that was a great shame. And my mother's mother loved music too. She was not so much a singer, but she loved music. The family all did.
I'm not at all convinced that talent will out. I think often it doesn't. And I can't help but wonder what we're missing by not getting to hear the parents of the famous singers.
Oh, I'm sure of that. I think that very often people were held back by the lives that they led, or the areas in which they grew up, or the times in which they lived. It was not encouraged. My mother was not truly, she had one uncle who tried to help her a little bit, but she was not truly encouraged. And when she got married, it was not seemingly fit for a woman to work outside of the family. It seemed to be something against the husband, that he couldn't take care of his wife if she worked. And she was a very vital, interesting, intelligent woman. It was a shame in many ways, not to be able to use those talents. But instead, she was a wonderful mother, and she gave to her children the education that perhaps she was not totally encouraged to have. And she was a very wise woman in giving me many of the opportunities that I had were thanks to her. Much as I adored my father, I don't think he would have truly done all of these things. I think he thought it was much better for a girl to get married and to have a secure home, and the idea of his daughter traipsing around the world in the beginning was really not his idea of what he wanted for his child. But my mother fought for that. She always believed that a woman should have the right to work, perhaps because she had not been able to do so.
How did you come to make your Met debut?
Mr. Bing heard me when I was singing in Milano, and they were listening to auditions all day of various singers who had come from all over Italy. And I was supposed to be, I remember singing around 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and then there would always be a singer coming up to me and say, I have to catch a train to Bologna, I have to catch a train to Rome. And I said, okay, I live in Milano, that's okay. And I ended up being the last one of the day, and by the time I'd sat there so long, I said, I'm sure that my voice has sunk to the bottom of my feet. But anyway, I got up and sang, and I did Una voce poco fa, and then I think I did the Carmen Habanera, and then he asked for something else. I did the Cherubino aria. He asked me if I knew anything of Rosenkavalier, and I said yes. I sang part of a scene from Rosenkavalier, and we discussed everything in Italian, and I think he thought I was Italian. When I finished...
I didn't know he spoke Italian.
Yes, he did. And not too well, but he did speak Italian. And he loved Italian artists, and he loved the idea of an Italian artist. I think even several of them I know had them change their names to Italian names because he liked that aura. He did like an Italian aura.
Who changed his name?
Oh, there was a couple of girls that I know that he changed their names. There was one, a German artist, that he had her change her name to an Italian name. I've forgotten about it now. But I remember at that period of time he was very pro-Italian, and in fact, anybody who came in from Italy, I got $25 more than if I had come in from America. So when they discovered I was American, they were a little less satisfied with me, I think. But it was very interesting because the minute I finished my audition, he turned to me and he said, well, I don't have a contract for you this year, but in 1964 you will be making your debut, and I will be in communication with you. And I think it was the most exciting moment of my entire career, bar none, to this day. I walked home, and I was truly walking on pink clouds. And I walked in the door, and it was in an apartment where there were several girls who were also singers. And I had a little Monsard apartment, a servant's quarter, off the top of a spiral staircase that went upstairs, my own little quarters. And I walked in, and I said, I have a contract at the Met. I have a contract at the Met. And there was this wonderful group of singers suddenly surrounding me. We were all so excited. It was a thrill for any one of us to find out that one of us had been accepted for the Metropolitan Opera. We were all Americans, and this was the dream of every one of us, was that one day to sing at the Metropolitan Opera. So it was a very happy moment.
Did you have to fight to be allowed to, as a young girl, to go to Italy on your own?
Well, I didn't. The first time I went to Italy, I went with my mother. I was singing the Scheherazade of Ravel in Rome, and I had done it in Holland, and she went with me both places. My second trip was when I had the scholarship at the Mozarteum, and I was meant to be coming home, and I suddenly found myself going to Milano and then staying for my famous 4 months, and I never came home again.
At Salzburg, you starred as Carmen, the Salzburg Festival.
Yes.
How did that come to pass?
Oh, I was heard by wonderful maestro Leopold Hager, and he was putting on a special performance, and that was how that came about. He worked with me and developed it, and I was brought over.
Were conditions there special? Did you get lots of rehearsal?
Yes, we had a lot of rehearsal. There were 11 performances, and we had, I would say, a good 3-4 weeks of rehearsals beforehand. I must say that it was difficult on one side because, although he was wonderful to work with and a very good conductor, the staging was done in a style that I was not in agreement, and it was very hard pulling it together. They had a vision of Carmen as a Cuban gun runner. And it was one of those slightly modernized versions, which I kept trying to slowly bring back to Bizet's conception. I think we sort of came to terms with it, but it was very difficult because the viewpoint on the character was so very different from my own.
Nedda Casei, your husband died of cancer.
Yes.
Other spouses would have been destroyed, but you've bounced back. How?
Well, he was a wonderful, sunny, outgoing, warm human being who loved what I did and was very excited by my life and by my career. I did take off 2 or 3 years that we knew where life became very valuable and precious to us. And then after losing him, I went through a rough year, but it was a very strange happening. Shortly after his death, I was asked to sing Das Lied von der Erde of Mahler, and it was the first time I would be doing that. I had never sung that. I love Mahler, but that was one of the pieces I had never done. As you know, that's a little bit on the lower, richer, heavier, the Barbieri type of voice we were talking about earlier. And I had done usually the slightly higher, but I felt this was the right moment. I thought the words were so meaningful. It was like something special for my husband. So I decided to do it. And I learned that, and I went over to Taipei and did it there. Roberta Peters, who was a very good friend of mine, had given my name to somebody over there who was looking for a mezzo-soprano. And it turned out to be a very successful event. They were very pleased with me. I loved doing it. Maurice Stern was the tenor. We worked well together. It was a very happy, and it was about 8 months after my husband's death, and I sort of, in my mind, I dedicated those performances to him. The words were extremely meaningful about life and earth and death and reality. They invited me to come back very shortly thereafter to do the opening of their own company. City Opera had been over there and tried out the acoustics, but they were doing their own Aida. And they had brought in leading artists from all over the world and then using their own company as the basis, their symphony orchestra and their own dancers, Chinese dancers in the ballet, and their own chorus. And then the leading roles were done by people who were coming in from all over the world. And it was a very exciting event. I did 3 of the 9 performances that were done. And they turned out also to be very successful. So things began to slowly move in a direction of my returning to singing again. I was invited to sing at the Flan Festival and to do several weeks of master classes there. I was then invited down to Mexico to do some Carmens. I've been asked to do some of the, these wonderful classical cruises that they have now. I've been asked to do the Mozart Requiem again in Mexico, and I will be going over in March to sing with the Santa Cecilia, the Bruckner Te Deum. So very slowly I have been coming back into the musical world, which I sort of thought that I had semi-retired, maybe not truly retired, but with the death of my husband and 20 years at the Metropolitan Opera more or less coinciding, I felt that perhaps this was the moment to start looking at a different career. Not that I would ever stop, because I love working and there's so many exciting things to do and so many ways of using music, and all of the wonderful opportunities I've had in life and the travel and the people I've known. There are many things I still want to do in other ways, not necessarily as a singer. And therefore I was not upset or destroyed by the idea of retirement. I had already had in mind many other things I wanted to do, but I seem to be coming back into singing more and more.
We'll be talking about Nedda Casei's other lives in a little while after hearing some of her records. Do you crave performing or not really?
Not really. I don't think I'm one of those performers who cannot live without it. I know I have friends, and I see them, they're very unhappy when they're not performing. I have so many things to do and so much that I would like to do. There are not enough hours in my day, and there are not enough months in the year for me to attempt the things I want to do. So the singing is one form of expressing myself, but it's not the only way.
Did the Met drop you, or did you quit it around the time of your husband's illness?
Well, it was sort of a mutual pulling apart. I had been given my 20th year watch and a lovely party by the Met, and I have very good feelings with the Met. It was at a time when I was aware of my husband's illness. He was still feeling good and enjoying life, and I wanted to enjoy it with him. I did not go in and discuss the following season and ask what are they going to give me, nor did they call me in to say we have something wonderful and exciting. We must have you for next season. It was just sort of a parting of the ways without any discussion or desire on either side. They may have felt that if I had come in, they would have found something for me, and I would have continued my association with them. On the other hand, they did not reach out to me, nor did I reach out to them. It was the way life was going for me at that moment, and I did not follow through. And in this day and age, I think one does have to battle for a career. There are too many people and too many good artists who are very eager for the work and who will be in there. If they're not in there, their agents certainly will be. And you really have to fight for things, and I did not do that.
Have you battled?
Oh, yes. I think we all have to battle for things we believe in and want to do. I have battled, yes.
What were some of the toughest or most important fights?
Well, sometimes going in with Mr. Bing and saying, I want to do this. This is an old role I know I can do. One of them was Carmen. And sometimes he would give me some performances. I did do the Carmen under Bing before the famous one that you were discussing earlier. I had done student performances, and I had done, there were certain roles that I wanted to do, and I would see what was going to come up on the roster, and I would go in and we would have discussions, and he'd say, well, maybe in 2 years, or on occasion he would give me some. But you can't sit back and just let life pass over you either, because there are too many good people in this particular career, all wanting to get ahead, and you have to make your wants known. Otherwise, they forget about you a little bit.
How did one prevail with Rudolph Bing?
Well, I found his door was always open. I could call and make an appointment and go in and say, really, this is something I believe I can do and I want to do, and can't you see me in this role? Sometimes he would say, no, I don't see you in this role, but prove me wrong. Go out and do it somewhere else. I'll watch. I'll follow. He was never a negative to me. Now, I know there were other people who had very different experiences, but my own with him was positive.
Although it was in the Met's interest to keep its house artists at hand, he did give you your freedom.
Yes. I sang with Houston and Chicago and Philadelphia and Hartford and all over this country, and went back and forth to Europe, too.
Was it uncharacteristic of him to let house artists out, so to speak?
In some cases, yes. I know of several that were kept under tight rein and were not allowed to go. I was given somewhat more freedom. I had a very good agent. I had Saul Urach, who was my agent, and perhaps that had a little bearing on it.
How was he able to help?
Well, I think just the name alone had a great deal of power, and he was a very charming man. He would be seen backstage, and no matter what the role, I would receive a dozen roses, and at the beginning of the season, there was always a great warmth in this man. He was a tremendous personality, and I think just being on his roster was a great power in itself.
You have bewitched many and continue to do so. Was Bing immune to bewitchment?
I don't think I ever bewitched Sir Rudolph. I didn't know him on any kind of a personal plane. I might have liked to. He was a very charming, very attractive man, but it didn't happen. I'm sorry to say.
My guest, Nedda Casei, is one of the most powerful women in opera, the president of the American Guild of Musical Artists. We'll listen to some music and, of course, take phone calls. Later, talk about AGMA and its causes. Nedda Casei, what is it that you've brought to play?
I think the first one there is Trovatore, the second act scene with the tenor, the strilla vampa, and then leading into condotta e rinceppi. And then the fourth act, Ai nostri monti, follows.
Who are the other performers?
Michael Molese is the tenor, and Virginia Gordoni is the soprano in the last act.
Now, with names like that in the cast, the suspicion arises that we're dealing with an album funded by one or more of the artists. Is that the case?
No, not at all. This was done by Concert Hall, which was a group working out of Switzerland, and it was done with Vienna Staatsoper, orchestra and chorus, and all of the rest of the artists were from the Vienna Staatsoper, and Maestro Nello Santi was the conductor. No, this was a group that came down to Milano and auditioned everybody, and it turned out that 3 Americans ended up doing the 3 leads.
On what did they base their hope for sales?
That it was a good record.
So, the number here, 212-854-5223. That's 854-5223. Do please phone with questions for or statements about our guest, Nedda Casei. I'm Stefan Zucker. This is WKCR-FM New York. And next week, the 19th, Franco Corelli will return to the show for Corelli Compares Gigli, Schipa, and Tagliavini. I'll be hosting the show on January 26th. I just found out about that. I don't know what we'll be doing yet. And Franco Corelli will return on February 2nd for Corelli Presents Perdile. On February 9th, my guest will be Francisco Araiza, returning. He'll come here after having sung Tamino on the Mets Saturday broadcast. The show begins at 10:30 and ends around 2 in the morning. Now, many of these developments here are on short notice, and because of that, you won't read about them in the papers, since we will have missed press deadlines. The January 19th and February 2nd shows are well publicized, and you'll probably see them listed here and there. The other shows won't be listed, so I hope you'll tune in and indeed tell your friends about what's cooking. Monica Birkenthal, my student alternate, who, according to you, I didn't catch the shows, was very successful in the fall. She was the first student to meet with your approval. We'll be returning to the slot in late February, and we will continue to alternate thereafter. Again, Nedda Casei, Virginia Gordoni, and Michael Molese in Trovatore. The number here, 212-854-5223. Hi, we're working, it seems, with a defective module on the control console. Wait, please. We're working with a defective module on the control console. Fortunately, there are other modules, and what I'm going to do is restart the selection using one of the other modules. I think the sound will be much better. Sorry for the problem. This is, of course, the home of technical difficulties. WKCR-FM New York. I can tell you many amusing and true stories about the modules here on the cassette recorder. About 10 years ago, one of the... All right, I've never said this before, but it is a true story, apparently. One of the boys here, this is a student station, taking a phone call, ejaculated on the console. They had to, ultimately they replaced the module, but only after years of putting up with glitches. Callers can get one very excited, as can guests. So we'll hear Trovatore excerpts. These are college boys. We'll hear Trovatore. It's true. I'm sorry. I don't mean to embarrass him, but he told everybody, and apparently it was true. And I won't name him. I suppose the first time I've not named somebody, but we'll hear excerpts from Trovatore with Michael Molese, Virginia Gordoni, and our guest Nedda Casei. 212-854-5223. Just rewinding, it'll take one moment. Again, sorry for all of this and for my telling tales out of school. This is literally a school. Here we go.
Compagni avanza e giorno a procacciarsi un po', su scendiamo per le province vive. Andiamo.
Guided me. As it was, I was left a little bit to the devices of men in the office at a time when the Hurock office itself was going through a lot of changes. It was sold from the Sol Hurock individual into a very big corporation, and there were many changes that came about at that time. I did do a lot of trusting. I was, as I said, thrilled to be at the Met. It was my dream to be there. I was equally thrilled to be on the roster of Sol Hurock, with next to the names of people like Blanche Thieblom and like Marian Anderson and Jerome Hines and Isaac Stern and Van Cliburn. They were all the top at that time, and I was probably the very least known of anybody on the roster. And for me, it was a thrill, and perhaps I didn't push enough. It was not my nature. If I'd had somebody else maybe pushing me, but I'm not sure that it would have worked out all that differently. I don't think I have quite enough push myself for the big career. I have a feeling that one has to have such an enormous desire and such an enormous drive that nothing will stand in your way. And I don't quite have that. I love music, and I love singing. I love performing, and I love people. But I don't think I have quite the little edge that one has for the truly great career. Or that you have to have, as you were saying, somebody else who has that edge and that desire for you.
Who is the woman in the York office?
I don't remember her name anymore, I'm sorry, but she had a very great reputation. She had helped to build the career of Patrice Munsell and Roberta Peters, and she worked with all the young artists that Hurock was interested in.
Who are some women singers with wives in that sense?
Renata Scotto has a wonderful husband. He was a first violinist at La Scala, and a very musical, fine coach, and always works with her, and left his position at La Scala to travel with her and to help to build her career. And I think that he has been a tremendous helpmate. Rise Stevens was another one. Her husband was a very great actor and director in Czechoslovakia, and came here to the United States after marrying her, and was got here through the war, and ended up by building her career. And I think that was a great helpmate to her, standing beside her and seeing that things were done right for her. He was a stage director and a stage manager and a stage mother and a stage father to her. And I think it makes a very different career.
What would have happened had you had more push? It's difficult to deal with counterfactuals, but still, suppose you had had more push, or there had been someone who had done these things for you. How might it have made a difference?
Well, I might have had more opportunity to do some of the mezzo-coloratura, which I think was a real specialty of mine. I always had a very easy flair for coloratura, and I had an easy top. I loved the roles, and I think that I would have had more opportunity to do them. Also, I think the Carmen, I would have had somebody who would have battled to get me some more important Carmens. I did many Carmens, but not necessarily at important occasions, at important moments. And that would have made me a well-known Carmen, because I feel very strongly that that is a strong suit for me, that would have been a great card. There are not really too many good Carmens. And I feel that was a very special role for me. I had studied castanets and Spanish dance, and it was something that from the first moment that I studied it, that I felt very comfortable. And I've always enjoyed doing the acting of it and the theater of it, the characterization, the colors of the voice, all the things that were mentioned in your article are very important to me. And I find new ones and changes as I've grown. It's funny, when I was sort of looking over what records to bring to you, I found a very old one, which was the first, before I'd even performed Carmen. It was done down in South Africa on a tour that I did down there. I opened so many concert halls in South Africa and traveled 10,000 miles by combi in the very early days of my career.
How did that come to pass?
Oh, there was somebody who came from the Arts Council from South Africa and knew a bass, a Norwegian bass who had married a South African girl who had been in Basel, and I sang for a season at the Basel Staatsoper, and I was doing the Barber of Seville, and he was passing through because it had been his old alma mater theater, and he was looking for talents to go to South Africa, and he heard me and thought immediately that I would make a good person for what they needed. They were forming 5 artists to do scenes from opera and go through South Africa. They had just formed an arts council, and they asked me, along with an Italian tenor by the name of Gaetano Bardini and a French girl by the name of Elizabeth Dobsik, and this Norwegian bass and his wife. I was just trying to think of their name. She was Elizabeth Wietshuizen, a South African name. And isn't that funny? He who was the guiding light, I've forgotten his name. Anyway, the 5 of us went through South Africa on a 3-month tour and opened practically all their theaters. They had just been built, and many a dusty road and many long trips.
30 years ago, so far as I know, there was no movement among artists to boycott South Africa.
Well, not really. There wasn't any movement, but I do remember I was just grateful to be offered a job for 3 months and to be earning my living and getting a chance to do my thing. I don't think I was politically aware at all at that time. I seem to have ended up in Ireland when they had the outbreak in Northern Ireland and the war, and my costumes were cut and wigs were destroyed and things because they discovered my name was Casey and they couldn't decide whether I was a Protestant or a Catholic. And I seem to have been caught in the upset that they had in Brussels. I've been in 2 or 3 conflagrations and I was totally unaware. They blew off the front of my hotel in Brussels, and my mother called on the telephone to say that was I all right, and I was totally unaware that it had been blown off the front of the building. I was in the back of the building and not aware what had happened at all. So I was so in the operatic world and so into doing my thing that I was not aware of the outside world to that great an extent at that moment. When I got to South Africa, I saw a lot of things. The first year that I went, they still had a mixture. The black part of the audience was forced to sit in the back of the theater, but they did share the performances. The second time I went back, that was no longer possible. And apartheid took over in the period of time that I was going there. I saw it develop to the point where an Indian gentleman would ask me about tickets to the performance, and somebody would tell me afterwards, he knows he can't come to your performance. So I began to go into compounds, and I sang for black people, and there, in fact, it was very interesting in Cape Town. They had an opera, what the Cape Coloreds was what that was called, and they had their own opera company. The white opera company did not dare to do the same operas because the Cape Colored opera company was so much better. In fact, at that time, one of their singers was singing at La Scala. So they had a very fine caliber. The Cape, what they called the Cape Coloreds, the mixed families of many generations, had many of the stores, and they were very educated and very elegant people. And this apartheid thing it was a very new thing that came about in about 47, 48 after the British left, and there was a lot of bad feelings that rose up between the British and the Boer, the Dutch descendants, because of their enmity, and then they devised this apartheid, and suddenly they both could unite against somebody else. Up until that time, there hadn't been this line of demarcation between peoples. And it was very sad to see. There were areas where they were truly what you would call a primitive native people who came down from Upper Africa to work in the mines and would then go back. But there were other people who had been there and cultured and as refined as anybody you would want to know. And it was a very difficult situation, very ugly, and I did not go back after 68.
Nedda Casei, as we'll discover, has devoted much of her time for a number of years now to helping people. On that subject, what is the American Guild? Oh, wait, you're listening to WKCR-FM New York, 89.9 on the dial. My guest is Nedda Casei, C-A-S-E-I. I'm Stefan Zucker. This is Opera Fanatic. A week from tonight, Saturday, January 19th, from 10:30 in the evening until 2 in the morning, the guest will be Franco Corelli, part of our ongoing series. The program will be called Corelli Compares Gigli, Schipa, and Tagliavini. I'll be back here on January 26th, again at 10:30, with a program the contents of which are to be determined. Then Franco Corelli will return February 2nd with Corelli Presents Perdile. On February 9th, Francisco Araiza will return to the program. Last Saturday he was the guest, and I did something quite daring, ill-advised even, doing the entire show with no music, no phone calls, unable to tear away from him for long enough for any of that. Well, we'll make up for that, and we'll play him in a variety of repertory and pick up where we left off. A great deal remains to be said. Nedda Casei, what is the American Guild of Musical Artists?
That is the guild or union that represents opera singers, choristers, the dance in the classical world, modern dance, ballet, choreographers, stage directors, and stage managers. We even originally had solo instrumentalists, but in the 1940s they were taken over by the musicians unit. Although we do still have, I think, 3 soloist members who perform in AGMA theaters and are still members of AGMA. Our founding fathers were Lawrence Tibbett, Jascha Heifetz, the leading singers of that period of time in 1937, when they came together with the need for an organization not to protect the stars, although it was stars that formed AGMA, but they realized that their fellow colleagues were grossly underpaid, sometimes not paid at all, working for such meager wages, often not paid if they went on the road, couldn't even get back home. Some very terrible things were happening. There wasn't even a dream of insurances or care or weekly stipends or anything that we take for granted today. And they formed this group of people, caring people, to start to defend all artists. A year later, the chorus, there had been a chorus group, joined, and Elizabeth Huppel, who had been the head of it, one of our trustees, just recently died, but she has been with us all these years until this past year, informing the AGMA Emergency Relief Fund, and was one of the guardians of that throughout all these years. It was a setting up of some kind of rules, some kind of caring about the artists, dealing with the theaters, trying to protect those who could not protect themselves with the force of these stars.
You've been president of AGMA since 83?
Right, 8 years.
How did that come to pass?
Oh, one day long ago, in 69, I appeared at a meeting out of curiosity, and they needed somebody to be on a negotiating committee, and there were no other women soloists there, so I became an automatic candidate. And that brought me into the union and began to see how things worked, and I became very interested. That was the year of the famous lockout, and I came back and found a telegram under my door saying that my services were no longer needed, and I had just left Europe, where I could have stayed and picked up work, and found myself here suddenly with 3 or 4 months ahead, and evidently nothing about to happen. I went into the negotiations. I was on the committee, and I found out very quickly how things worked. And I began to realize there really was a need for people to be involved, and we artists quite often are not. We leave it to somebody else. We are so engrossed in our own careers, in our own life. Time is precious. When we have a little time, we want to spend it with our families. But at this moment, I took on a battle because it was my own personal battle. It was my contract, and I was the only woman in the group, and I felt somebody had to say some of the things that needed to be said. As a result, I ended up several times being asked to be a negotiator, kind of by default. I eventually was put on the board of governors of AGMA, and it came about, I think, because at one point I had made a rather impassioned plea speech for the chorus. There was something that they were trying very hard to get. And the solo artists were feeling, no, we're not that interested in these things. We have our contracts. We're all set. We want to go to work. We don't want to lose any work. And they were talking about a possible strike of 1 week or 2 weeks to try and give them the time to obtain the things they needed. And I, at that moment, got up and I said, these are the people who stand beside us. And going back to being a cover artist, when you suddenly have to go on the stage, it's a chorister who gives you a loving hand and reaches out and says, over here, Nedda. Or another one that says, this side, or come with me, or comes up and gives you a loving embrace and says, that was wonderful. These are the people that make you survive a performance. And I said, don't forget it. They're asking for your 1 week. How many times have they saved your skin or made it so that you were able to survive a difficult moment, or helped you, or are your friends? And it was enough that they gave the chorus that week or two, and the chorus did obtain what they wanted. So I think the chorus didn't forget that speech. And later on, they came to me and they said, we would like very much to have you run as president. And it was just at the time Cornell McNeil had retired, and the young man that had taken over from City Opera was very busy with his work. And also I think they sort of wanted somebody who had been connected with the Metropolitan Opera. They always seemed to feel that they liked that in the president of AGMA, rightly or wrongly. And so they felt that I would be the one they would like to have run as the first woman. It was time.
Now, correct me if I'm overstating. There you were, a lovely young thing, hoping for more plums from Rudolph Bing. Presumably the signals were something like, do what I want, and you'll be rewarded by getting more parts and better ones. Is that roughly accurate?
Well, not always. I always had the feeling, you see, by the time I was involved in this, if you're connecting it with the presidency, Rudolph Bing was long gone from the Metropolitan Opera.
I was thinking about 1969.
In the 69, I'm sure that it probably had a bearing. Everybody seems to feel that it did. I never did.
What had a bearing?
Well, that there was possibly less friendly feelings, although I personally didn't feel that. This is what other people have said to me, that perhaps I endangered my career by taking stands and by showing myself as a sort of unionist. I never had that feeling. I always had the feeling that they respected me. Yeah. I never said anything that I wouldn't have said to them directly anyway. I personally never felt that it was, there might have been 1 or 2 people who felt that way, but I didn't get the feeling from the majority of management that this was a negative.
Mm. Some years ago, Will Roy was a guest on the program. He, according to him, had appeared as the commendatore with a company in Texas, I forget which, and had stipulated that smoke not be used, stage smoke, for, according to Will Roy, it is naphtha-based, and he is allergic to it. He alleged that they used that having signed an agreement that they would not use this, they went ahead and did so anyway. So awful was his allergic reaction that he was hospitalized and for a time was near death. Since then, he's been in litigation in connection with this and has urged that AGMA take a stand. Is my characterization
Yes,
accurate?
absolutely, and we are 100% back of this. We have had for some time now a safety study program, but when Will went through a second time, we really have taken some serious, we've paid for some studies because theaters were accepting the chemical companies that make these products. We were accepting what they said as bona fide, and we have discovered you cannot do that. We are now having independent studies made, and in fact, I hope to make this worldwide, not just the United States. There were several stories. June Anderson had difficulties in Italy. There have been it's not just stage smoke. There are other things such as paint fumes. They have a tendency, if something on a costume nowadays they want to do something a little different, they come and spray paint you, and some of these are quite toxic. And for people, and all singers seem to be very allergic people to one thing or another, or super sensitive, because this is their breathing apparatus and their throat structure is so vital to them that they probably are more aware and more sensitive than most human beings would be. And it's a double indemnity for them. We are doing studies, and there are some government studies that we are putting together, and we hope to communicate this to all of the unions worldwide. And we have already talked with Germany. The head of the union was here in the United States and happens to be an American who has made a German career and is now semi-retired and has become the head of the union over there. And we had a long discussion, and they were equally interested. I think one of the problems was that people didn't take these allergies seriously enough. I think now that we've had some of these repercussions, exactly as what happened to Will Roy, now they take it seriously. But until somebody is damaged, unfortunately, people do not pay attention. And it was just looked as a singer who's creating a nuisance. And it probably wouldn't bother. A few years ago, I remember Cornell McNeil was doing Othello. And they had a type of smoke that was supposedly harmless, but he is an asthmatic and has a tendency to be irritated by any of these kind of substances. And he warned the theater that it had to be a very light smoke in that first act of Othello, when it's supposed to be like the fog and the water rushing up, and it's kind of a film that comes in. And he warned them that it could never go beyond a certain point, or he would have to leave the theater. And literally, one night, evidently, somebody wasn't paying careful attention, or whatever happened. Anyway, out rolled a great deal of this. And Cornell McNeil simply went home. He had to leave the theater. And they had to run around and find a Iago, which is rather difficult to do at the last moment during a performance.
Consider the position of Adelaide Negri, an artist rather different from those favored by the Met, somebody who intentionally changes the color of her voice for the sake of expression, abandoning seamlessness, abandoning, if you will, an instrumental line for the sake of the drama, on an awkward footing with administrators such as those who run the Met. She, a cover, and in the second cast, was slated to perform Ernani, and had a similar discussion about stage smoke for at Elvira's entrance in the Met's current Ernani production. Some smoke is sprayed or used somehow, they went ahead and sprayed the stuff anyway, and she nearly choked during Erdnani and Volami.
Well, we hope that this, when somebody has a problem like this, that they will let us know before they have to go through a performance. I am surprised that the Metropolitan Opera would not take heed, because they've had several instances where they have had to lose an artist and they've paid heavily for it. I'm really surprised because they do try. I know they have a list of things that they try not to use. They are more aware of toxic paints. It's not only for singers, because people who are working backstage with costumes have been complaining. People in makeup departments are finding glues and various chemicals that we use quite casually can affect a lot of people when they have to deal with them time and again over a period of time. So it's a very serious matter, and we're really looking into the safety measures today.
Who's some other artists who ended up pulling out on account of such things?
Well, at the moment, the only one I can think of that comes to mind is Cornell McNeil, where they had to telephone the cover, had thought the performance was underway, and it left the theater, and they could not find him at that moment. And they had to call Cheryl Milnes, who was doing a Saturday broadcast and had done a Tuesday night performance, and this was Friday night. It made it back-to-back with his matinee the next day, and I'm sure this was a costly experience for everybody in more ways than one. I can't think. I know that June Anderson it was written up in the New York Times that she had to withdraw from a performance in Italy because of some fumes, and several other singers ended up in the performance in which she had the reaction, coughing and having problems. I have read about artists. I cannot name names, particularly at the Met, because I think they have tried. I think the Met has tried to avoid this issue.
Consider the ring cycle mounted by the Boston Lyric Opera about 6 or 7 years ago. I'm sorry, could your friend go down and let them in? There's an alarm going off. Is he still around?
I don't see him.
Oh dear. Huh. We can go to music.
You want me to go?
And
You want me to go?
No. Let's.
He's probably around the corner. I just don't see him.
Yeah. Would you mind checking for him and asking him to prop the door open and...
Downstairs?
Yeah, and let the person... Prop a door open up here and let somebody in. Sorry about all of this weird doorman. Nedda Casei will be back in just a moment, and we'll be discussing a number of questions having to do with what singers are paid, how singers manage financially. I think it will emerge that, for the most part, singers in this country cannot rely exclusively on singing for their livelihoods. Good. Remember the Boston Lyric Opera? They mounted they're still in existence. They mounted a ring cycle, perhaps because they had little scenery. They resorted to smoke quite a bit. If one of the artists had objected, the artist probably would have been replaced on the grounds that smoke was central to the production. What position might AGMA have taken?
Oh, that's not possible. You can't replace. If they have a contract, it's pay or play, and we don't approve of removing for any artificial reason, like they have to find a non-toxic chemical. There are some. Yeah. So it's not that they have to use these toxic substances, and they are doing studies to make them improved.
Back in the early and mid-'80s, several artists from the City Opera were guests here on the program. They said that For the first 2 years during which they were under contract to the company, the pay was $300 per performance with no pay for rehearsals, and that, if lucky, they got to sing there maybe 4 to 6 times annually. Does this ring true?
You're talking about the soloists.
Yeah, back in the early and mid-'80s at City Opera.
Well, it's quite different now. I think that the fees probably would be closer to $1,000 or more per performance for a soloist, one of their leading soloists, and they would be your chorister, of course, gets paid for rehearsals and gets a weekly fee. The choristers averaged a couple of years ago, I think, around $33,000 for, I think they had 34 weeks of work a year at City Opera, if I'm not mistaken. But unfortunately, although their pay scale has risen and their rehearsal hour monies are better, there are less weeks. And so I would just say that the chorister today probably is averaging about $22,000, a good $10,000 than a couple of years ago, which is very unfortunate. And City Opera has been going through a period of tightening the belt, trying to save the company. Beverly Sills had done a wonderful job of pulling it out of the red and putting it on the map, but I think they're a bit fearful without her, that the fundraising is not quite as smooth, and we're in difficult times. It's very difficult to raise funds today. A recession has hit everybody. So I think that the City Opera is going through a very tight period. AGMA represents many theaters across the country, and we make probably 150 basic agreements. Most unions have probably one national agreement. We make individualized contracts with each house. We're the only union that deals with nothing but non-profit. And in order to keep some of these houses afloat and to keep jobs for our people, we have to individualize the contracts for each theater according to their means and their financial situation and the locality in which they are. We would like to see one uniform basic agreement cross-country, but it just is not feasible. We also have right-to-work states. Some states you cannot insist on being unionized, and members profit from union representation without having to be members of the union. So we run into a lot of difficulties in building and creating these contracts, but we, I think, have done extremely well in bettering the life of the opera singer today, and I think you will find the average paycheck of most of them, certainly those in the leading houses, are quite good. Chorus, for example, at the Met probably averages around $62,000 to $65,000 a year. Plus they have retirement benefits, they have medical benefits. If they do special roles or additional things, they have their Saturday broadcast, they have extra monies. I think they do quite well. Your soloists probably run from those that perform. Of course, it depends on how many times you perform. The top fee at the Metropolitan Opera for a soloist is $10,000. Now, many of the other theaters in the United States pay much more. I think that the Met feels that because it is the Metropolitan Opera and that it adds so much stature to an artist to be performing at the Metropolitan Opera, that is part of being there, that they do not pay the exorbitant fees that are now becoming the norm. I think you would find that probably the Chicago Lyric, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, are all paying for really big stars, are paying $20,000, $25,000 per performance, which is what you are finding in Europe as well.
What about the extra choristers? How did they do? Both City Opera and the Met have two choruses, a regular chorus and an extra. What is the difference?
The extra chorus is when they need to augment the larger operas and they need more people. They are on tap, ready to go, and they are paid for rehearsals, and they are paid. They have their own pay scales for the extra chorus, and quite often they become the nucleus for when they're bringing in new choristers, that they take them from the extra chorus.
And what do those people make?
It can vary. I really wouldn't like to give you any false information, and I don't have the details of the extra chorus. I'm sorry.
My feeling, from what I've heard them say, is that they don't do nearly as well financially.
Oh, I'm sure not, because they don't have the guarantees. They don't have the probably all of the benefits either that go along with the regular chorister. That's a very good job, the chorister in the leading theaters, especially the Metropolitan Opera. The benefits there are very good, and they are top of the line.
Regular choristers at City Opera making $22,000 a year, in many cases, do better than the soloists who don't
Yes.
get nearly to perform nearly as often. They may get paid $1,000 a performance, but they don't do that many performances
Exactly.
a year.
They may do 6 performances, which means 6,000 versus 22. However, they usually are free to go to other companies where they will make money using the fact that they have sung with City Opera, which has a certain prestige and gives an opportunity, hopefully, to a young artist to have a chance to sing leading roles in a New York theater of
Still,
good stature.
Some end up supplementing their incomes from teaching voice.
Oh, yes.
Others
Many.
from doing pop music, still
Vo-
others.
Voiceovers, commercials. There are many ways they augment and even some do it word processor, secretarial work, or a loving spouse. Because $22,000, even for the chorister who's making perhaps more money, is not a large salary in a city like New York City.
It helps if you're a doctor's wife, as some are. Several well-known diva and voice teachers, Carolina Segrera, perhaps Licia Albanese, have advised their students to seek good marriages, meaning marriages with his money, so that they can, so that the singers, the pupils, can afford to pursue careers.
It's a very expensive career, especially in today's world. The studies are very expensive. Voice lessons are $7,500, $100 more per hour, and your coaches and accompanists are getting $50 an hour, and language teachers, I don't know what they're getting, but I'm sure if you started taking languages and a couple of voice lessons a week, and really when you're a young person you need at least 2 voice lessons a week, and if you do anything like taking calisthenics or exercise, which I think is very vital and very important for a singer, both for their breathing and for their health of their body and their instrument, which is their body, and for movement on stage. These are costly things in today's world, and the cost of living in New York City or in any of your major cities is very expensive. I often wonder to myself, how do these young people survive today and prepare themselves properly for a career?
There are singers who, there are coaches, good ones, charging less than $50, and certainly there are pianists who help singers with the basics of roles who charge less. Why don't we turn to some more music and then afterwards discuss, among other things, Nedda Casei's great cause, the AGMA Relief Fund, doing some important work in connection with AIDS and more. Nedda, what's upcoming to play?
Well, there's the duet from Madame Butterfly and a little taste of La Bohème of Leoncavallo, if you'd like to hear that, or I have the C minor Mass of Mozart.
You decide.
Oh, dear.
You decide.
Well, go ahead with what's on there. It's probably the easiest.
When and where was this recorded, and with whom?
This is again with Virginia Gordoni. It was at that same series. We did a series of things in Vienna. I think this was the following year.
Late 60s?
Yes.
So, you are listening to WKCR-FM New York, 89.9 on the dial, Opera Fanatic. I'm Stefan Zucker. My guest is Nedda Casei, C-A-S-E-I. Next week, Franco Corelli will return to the show for Corelli Compares Gigli, Schipa, and Tagliavini. I'll be back on January 26th with a program, the contents of which remains to be determined. I was just told that I'll be doing the date, sitting in for Monica Bergenthal. I'll be back on February 2nd with Franco Corelli Presents Perdile. And on February 9th, I'll be interviewing Francisco Araiza, returning to the show after last week's highly successful appearance. Then I'll be alternating after that with Monica Bergenthal. Should you care for a schedule of broadcasts, do write to me, care of Opera Fanatic magazine, Bel Canto Society Inc. Again, that's Bel Canto Society Inc. 11 Riverside Drive, New York, 10023. Bel Canto Society Inc. 11 Riverside Drive, New York, 10023. The number here, should you care to call with questions for or comments about Nedda Casei, 212-854-5223. Again, that's 854-5223. Nedda Casei in Butterfly with Gordoni, and what was this?
No, I'm about to change my mind, if I may. I think instead of the Butterfly, since our time is a little limited now, maybe something more recent would be fun. It's entirely different. It's Debussy's La Chevelure and Ravel's Vocalise, and it's set up on side 1 there.
Dolby?
Yes.
212-854-5223.
It's a little different side of